The jade hairpin was the only thing of value Lin Jing had left. It was a cool, smooth weight in her palm, carved with a phoenix in flight, a wedding gift from a life that now felt as distant as the mountains of Guangdong province. She sat ramrod straight on the hard wooden chair in the Redemption Gulch land office, the oppressive Montana summer heat pressing in through the single open window. Dust motes danced in the slab of sunlight cutting across the room, illuminating the smudged ink on the papers spread across Registrar Henderson's desk. "The law is quite clear, Mrs. Way," Bartholomew Thorne said, his voice a low, syrupy thing that failed to conceal the steel beneath it. He was a large man, his waistcoat straining at the buttons, his face florid with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. "The Homestead Act requires a citizen, or one who has filed their intention to become one, to hold a claim. Your late husband, a fine worker I'm sure, met that requirement. You, however—" He let the sentence hang in the air, a deliberate cruelty. Lin Jing's English was precise, learned over long nights by candlelight after grueling days laying track for the Northern Pacific. "I am his widow. The claim passes to me. That is also the law." Henderson, a thin man with a perpetually nervous twitch in his eye, refused to meet her gaze. He shuffled papers, the sound loud in the tense silence. "There are complications, madam, ambiguities. Mr. Thorne has filed a competing claim, citing that the original filing is now invalid." "He is citing my face and my name as invalid," Lin Jing stated, her voice quiet but unwavering. It was the truth that no one in the room would speak aloud. She was Chinese, and she was a woman alone. In the eyes of men like Thorne, that made her property as available as the unclaimed dirt itself. The town whispered about her. They said she was proud, stubborn, too much. After her husband Wei had died in a rock slide the previous winter, they expected her to sell the 160-acre plot he'd worked himself to the bone for and disappear. Instead, she had hitched Wei's mule to his plow and carved furrows into the earth herself. She had shored up the dugout cabin, patched the roof, and cleared the creek bed. Her solitude and self-sufficiency were an affront, a puzzle they had no desire to solve. A man in the corner of the room shifted, drawing Lin Jing's attention for the first time. He had been there when she arrived, a quiet presence looking over a territorial map. He was lean, dressed in dusty, functional clothes, with a face weathered by sun and wind. A worn gun belt sat low on his hips, the leather dark with use, the handle of the Colt pistol smooth and familiar looking against his thigh. He said nothing, his gaze missing nothing. Thorne smiled, a predator's baring of teeth. "Let us be reasonable. I am prepared to offer you a fair price, $50 for your trouble, enough to get you to Helena, or perhaps back to whatever port you sailed from." $50. For the land Wei had called their heaven on earth, for the soil he had bled into. The insult was a physical blow. Lin Jing closed her hand tighter around the hairpin. "The land is not for sale." Thorne's patience snapped. The veneer of civility vanished. "You have until Friday. Take the money, or my lawyers will have an eviction order from the territorial marshal. You will leave with nothing but the clothes on your back. Do you understand me?" Lin Jing stood, her small frame radiating a dignity that made Thorne's bulk seem clumsy. She placed her palms flat on Henderson's desk and leaned forward, her eyes holding the registrar's until he finally, reluctantly, looked up. "I understand that you are a coward, Mr. Henderson, and you," she said, turning her gaze to Thorne, "are a thief." She turned and walked out of the office, her back straight, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. The man in the corner watched her go, his expression unreadable, before he slowly rolled up his map and followed her out into the blinding glare of the street. Thorne did not wait until Friday. 2 days later, the Grady brothers appeared at her homestead. They were rough men who worked for Thorne, their knuckles scarred and their eyes empty of everything but casual menace. Lin Jing was hauling water from the well when they rode up, their horses trampling the edges of her vegetable garden. "Mr. Thorne sent us," the older one, Cal, announced, spitting a stream of tobacco juice near her feet. "He wants you to reconsider his offer." "There is nothing to reconsider," Lin Jing said, setting her buckets down. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her hands steady. Wei's old shotgun was just inside the cabin door. The younger brother, Jesse, dismounted and swaggered over to the hand pump at the wellhead. It was her lifeline, the one piece of machinery she depended on utterly in the bone-dry summer. He grinned. "Shame if something were to happen to this here pump. Hard to farm without water." He picked up a heavy rock. "Get away from there." Lin Jing's voice was sharp. Cal laughed. "Or what, little lady? You gonna stop us?" That was when she moved. In a fluid motion, she was inside the cabin and back out again, the long barrel of the shotgun resting in her hands. She did not raise it to her shoulder. She simply held it, the weight a familiar, solid thing. "I said, get away!" The Gradys froze, surprised by the speed, but not intimidated. They were two, and she was one. They could see the tremor in her arms. "You ain't got the nerve," Jesse sneered and raised the rock. A voice, calm and low, cut through the tension. "I'd put the rock down if I were you." The man from the land office was standing at the edge of her property, not 20 yards away. Silas Vance. He hadn't ridden up. He had walked, silent as a shadow. His hands were empty, hanging loose at his sides. He looked at the Grady brothers, his gaze lingering for a moment on the brands on their horses, then on their faces. "This ain't your business, Drifter," Cal grumbled, his hand moving instinctively closer to the pistol on his hip. "Man breaks a woman's water pump on land that ain't his. That's a crime," Silas said, his tone conversational. "Marshall might not be interested, but the circuit judge might be, especially when I tell him you work for Bartholomew Thorne. Judges get curious about patterns." He took a slow step forward. The Grady brothers exchanged a nervous glance. This man's stillness was more unnerving than any threat. He wasn't posturing. He was stating facts. Jesse, feeling his courage waver, made a final, foolish gesture. He slammed the rock down hard on the pump's iron housing. There was a sickening crack of metal. He then dropped the rock and scrambled back onto his horse. "Message delivered," he stammered. The two brothers spurred their horses and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust and a broken pump behind them. Lin Jing's arms finally gave way, and the barrel of the shotgun dipped towards the ground. The adrenaline drained out of her, leaving a cold dread. The pump was broken. They had won. Without water, her crops would wither in days. She would be starved out. Silas Vance walked over, his boots making soft sounds in the dust. He didn't look at her. He looked at the pump. He crouched, examining the damage. "He didn't break the casing," he said, more to himself than to her. "Just the handle mechanism." He looked up at her then. "You have tools?" Lin Jing stared at him, bewildered. "What?" "Tools," he repeated patiently. "A wrench, a hammer, whatever your husband left." She nodded numbly and gestured toward the small shed. He went inside and returned with Wei's worn tool roll. He knelt by the well, spread the tools on a piece of sackcloth, and began to work. Lin Jing stood watching, silent and suspicious. No one had offered her help since Wei died. Help in Redemption Gulch always came with a price. His hands were remarkable.
They were calloused and scarred, but they moved with a surgeon's precision.
He unscrewed bolts, tapped at pins, and peered into the intricate workings of the pump with an expert eye. He didn't grunt or curse. He worked with a quiet, focused intensity. He seemed to understand the machine, to speak its language of levers and gears. "It's a Model 3, he said, not looking up. "Good design, but the shear pin on the pivot arm is its weak point, made to break under stress so it doesn't shatter the whole gearbox." He found the broken pin, held it up for her to see, then rummaged in a small leather pouch he took from his own pocket. He produced a new pin, identical to the broken one. Within minutes, he had fitted it, reassembled the handle, and tightened the last bolt. He stood up, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "Try it now." Hesitantly, Lin Jing stepped forward. She took the cold iron handle. It felt solid, firm. She pushed it down and pulled it up.
There was a gurgle from deep in the earth, and then a stream of clear, cool water gushed from the spout, splashing onto the thirsty ground. Relief washed over her so intensely her knees felt weak. She looked from the life-giving water to the quiet man standing beside her. He had not just fixed a piece of iron. He had restored her hope. He had met a threat not with violence, but with competence. He had seen her problem, and without a word of pity or condescension, he had simply solved it. He followed her gaze as she looked out over her small, neat fields, the rows of corn and beans already starting to wilt slightly in the afternoon sun. "Thorn's not just after your land," Silas said, his voice dropping. It was the first time he had truly initiated a conversation with her. "He's after your water rights. I was looking at the territorial survey maps. Your claim is the only one in this valley with a creek that's spring-fed. It's the only one that doesn't run dry by August." Lin Jing's blood went cold. She had known the land was good, but she hadn't understood its strategic importance. Her small homestead was the key. Without it, Thorne's vast, arid holdings were worth half as much. He didn't just want her land, he needed it, and he would stop at nothing to get it. That evening, a fragile truce settled between them. Silas had a small claim on the adjacent plot, a piece of rocky ground no one else wanted. He had been on his way there when he heard the Grady's. Now, as dusk painted the sky in shades of violet and orange, he shared his meal of bacon and beans with her on the rough-hewn bench outside her cabin. The silence was no longer one of suspicion, but of contemplation. "Why do you stay?" he asked, breaking the quiet. "It would be easier to take the money." Lin Jing looked away toward the small mounded grave on the hill, marked by a simple wooden cross. "Easier is not always right," she said softly. "My husband, Wei, he loved this place. He was a scholar in our village, a poet. But there, he could not own land. He could not build a life. Here," she swept her hand out, encompassing the fields, the creek, the vast sky. "He believed it was possible. He would draw pictures of it in his journal. Canals to bring the water to the corn, terraces for the vegetables. He said we were not just planting seeds, we were planting our future." She fell silent for a moment, lost in the memory. "This land is not just dirt to me, Mr. Vance. It is his belief. I cannot sell his belief for $50. She went inside and returned with a thin, leather-bound book. She opened it on the bench between them.
The pages were filled with elegant Chinese characters and intricate, detailed drawings. There were sketches of water wheels, irrigation ditches, and notes on crop rotation. It was the work of a brilliant, hopeful mind. Silas could not read a single word, but he understood everything. He saw the care, the intelligence, the dream laid out on the page. He gently touched the worn cover. "He was a good man," he said. And the simple words held a universe of understanding. He stared out at the darkening landscape. "I used to be an engineer," he said, his voice so low she had to lean in to hear it. "For the Union Pacific. I designed trestles, laid out grades. I helped build the line that brought your husband here." It was a stunning admission. This quiet man with a gun on his hip was a builder, like Way. "I watched men like Thorne follow the railroad," he continued, his voice hardening. "They used our maps, our schedules. They'd get ahead of the track, buy up all the good land with the water rights, using phony claims and legal tricks. They'd cheat good people, families who had worked their whole lives, out of everything. I saw it over and over. I got tired of building things for men who only know how to break them, so I quit." He finally looked at her, and in his eyes she saw not a drifter or a gunslinger, but a man who had lost his own faith and was searching for a place to rebuild it. His gun was not an instrument of aggression, it was a shield. It was the tool he had picked up when his blueprints and slide rules were no longer enough to protect the things he valued. In that moment, Lin Jing understood him completely. Their newfound peace was shattered the next morning. A buggy crested the rise, followed by 2 riders. Bartholomew Thorne sat beside a grim-faced man with a silver star pinned to his vest, Territorial Marshal Croft. They pulled up in front of the cabin. Croft dismounted, his movements stiff and official. Thorne remained in his seat, a smug look on his face. "Mrs. Way," the marshal said, his voice devoid of emotion, "I have a legal matter to discuss with you." Silas stepped out of the shed, moving to stand a few feet from Lin Jing. He didn't speak, but his presence was a silent declaration. Thorne produced a sheaf of papers. "Marshal, this is a debt ledger. It shows that the deceased, Wei Chen, owed me a sum of $200 at the time of his passing, for supplies and seed. He used the homestead deed as collateral." Lin Jing gasped. "That is a lie. Wei never borrowed money from anyone. We paid for everything with cash from the railroad." "Your husband's signature is right here," Thorne said, pointing to a scrawl at the bottom of the page. It was a crude forgery, nothing like Wei's elegant script, but to a man who couldn't read the language, it might look plausible. Marshal Croft took the ledger, his eyes scanning it. He was not a corrupt man, but he was a man bound by paper and procedure. The document appeared legal on its surface. "Mrs. Way, this is a formal claim of lien. If you cannot produce the $200, Mr. Thorne is within his rights to foreclose on the collateral." "I do not have $200, she said, her voice a whisper. It was an impossible sum. "Then I'm afraid you have 48 hours to vacate the premises," Croft said, his face impassive. "The law is the law." The finality of his words was like a locked door. Thorne had won. He had found the one weapon against which her spirit and Silas's skill were useless. A forged piece of paper, sanctified by a silver star. Silas stepped forward. "Marshal, you know this is fraudulent." "What I know is what the paper says, Vance," Croft replied, his eyes hard. "Unless you have evidence to the contrary, my hands are tied. 48 hours. He and his riders turned and left. Thorne gave Lin Jing a last triumphant smirk before his buggy followed. They were alone again, with the dust and the silence and the impossible deadline. Lin Jing felt the world shrink to the small patch of ground she stood on. She could run. She could take what little she had and disappear, become another forgotten soul on the frontier. Or she could stay. To stay meant facing the full force of the law, a force wielded by a man who wanted her gone. It meant risking prison, or worse. Silas came to her side. "He's a liar, Lin Jing. But the marshal's right. We need proof." He looked at her, his gaze steady. "I'll stand with you, whatever you decide." The choice was hers. Everything Wei had worked for, everything she had fought to protect, came down to this moment. She looked at Wei's grave on the hill, then at the flowing water from the pump, a symbol of the life Silas had helped her save. She looked at the worn journal in her hands, the blueprint of a dream. Fleeing would mean that men like Thorn always won. It would mean Wei's belief was just a fool's hope. She straightened her shoulders. "I will not run," she said, her voice clear and strong. "This is my home." The choice cost her the illusion of safety, the possibility of an easy escape. It bound her to this land and to the man who stood beside her, come what may. 4 months later, the oppressive heat of summer had given way to the crisp, golden light of autumn. The cottonwoods along the creek were a blaze of yellow. Lin Jing's fields were a tapestry of abundance. The corn was harvested and stacked, the beans were dried, and the root cellar was full. The irrigation system, built from the designs in Wei's journal with Silas's engineering skill, had worked flawlessly, turning her small plot into the most productive land in the valley. Silas's own homestead, on the adjacent plot, was taking shape. A sturdy cabin stood where there had been only rock and sagebrush, and a new barn was half completed. They worked together, a partnership forged in crisis and tempered by mutual respect. He had taught her how to frame a wall. She had shown him the secrets of Wei's terraced garden beds. The town, which had once whispered that she was too much, now watched in grudging admiration. Their success, quiet and steady, was a rebuke to Thorn's greed. Thorn himself was gone. His power, which had seemed so absolute, had crumbled like dry earth. In the 48 hours Croft had given them, Silas had not reached for his gun. He had saddled his horse and ridden the 60 miles to the territorial capital in a day and a night. He had not gone to the law office. He had gone to the regional headquarters of the Northern Pacific Railroad. As a former engineer, he knew they kept meticulous records. He found Wei's employment file. It contained pay stubs for every month of his work, proving he had a steady income and no need for a loan. But Silas found something more important. He found the original surveyor's map for the railroad's right-of-way, a federal document that superseded any local claim. It clearly showed that the spring feeding the creek on Lin Jing's land was designated a public water source, vital for the railroad's steam engines. Thorn's claim had been based on a fraudulent, redrawn map he had filed at the local office. He had not just tried to steal from a widow, he had tried to steal from the railroad. When Marshal Croft was presented with federal documents and the quiet testimony of a railroad official, he had no choice.
Confronted with a power far greater than his own, Thorn was arrested for fraud, his empire of paper and intimidation collapsing overnight. Now, in the cool of the evening, Lin Jing and Silas stood on the porch of her cabin, looking out over the land they had saved together. He noticed the jade hairpin was back in her hair, its green stone catching the last rays of the setting sun. She had put it away for safekeeping during the confrontation, a treasure she couldn't bear to lose. Seeing it back in its place felt like a quiet victory. He turned to her, a rare smile touching the corners of his mouth.